What if an entire civilization millions strong, rich in gold, gods and glory vanished, not because of war or famine, but because it chose to disappear? In the heart of central Mexico, beneath the sprawling modern city of Mexico City, lies the ghost of an empire that once rivaled Rome in power, Egypt in ritual, and Greece in intellect. The Aztec Empire, known to its people as the Mexica, was more than a kingdom. It was a living machine of faith, blood, and ambition. But in the early 1500s, it met an end so swift, so absolute, that historians still whisper the same question: how does a world that vast simply stop? It began, as great tragedies often do, with omens. The Aztec Emperor Moctezuma, too, was restless. 4 nights he could not sleep. The skies above Tenochtitlan, his capital, glowed with strange lights, streaks of fire that cut across the heavens like swords. The temple priests reported the waters of Lake Texcoco boiling without reason, and commoners claimed to see a 2-headed creature walking through the market, speaking in a language no one could understand. The empire that once believed it could command the gods, now feared the gods, were sending warnings. Tenochtitlan itself was a miracle of human design, a city floating on water, shimmering under the sun like a crown of turquoise and obsidian. Causeways stretched across the lake like veins, carrying thousands of merchants, soldiers, and farmers into its heart. Canals replaced streets, and great temples pierced the sky, their steps soaked with centuries of ritual blood. At its height, the city may have housed over 200,000 people, cleaner, more organized, and more advanced than any European city of its time. But beneath that perfection, something was beginning to rot. The Aztecs believed the world had been born and destroyed 4 times before. They lived in what they called the 5th Sunnan Age, sustained by human sacrifice. Without offerings of blood, they believed the sun would die, plunging the world into eternal night. This belief was more than religion. It was law, science, and survival. Every beating heart torn from a chest atop the Templo Mayor was not murder in their eyes, but maintenance of the universe. Yet by 1519, even the gods seemed silent. Crops failed in some regions. Plagues of locusts darkened the skies, and word began to spread of pale-skinned strangers arriving on the eastern shoresmen with beards, beasts of war, and weapons that spat thunder. When the Spanish conquistador Hernán set foot on the coast, he was outnumbered 1,000 to 1. But he carried something deadlier than any sword: a story. Some Aztecs believed these strangers were divine messengers, the return of Quetzal, the feathered serpent god, long prophesied to come from the east. Moctezuma, torn between faith and fear, did not send armies to destroy them. He sent gifts, instead: gold, food, and courtesies that only deepened the Spaniards' hunger. As courts marched inland, he gathered allies, tribes who had suffered under Aztec rule. Together, they became a tide moving toward the Valley of Mexico. When Moctezuma finally met courts face to face, the meeting was eerily calm. 2 worlds, one ancient, one modern, stared into each other's eyes. Courts saw opportunity. Moctezuma saw destiny. But the mystery begins not with their meeting, but with what followed. Because the downfall of the Aztec Empire was not a simple conquest. It was an unraveling, a disappearance, not just of power, but of an entire way of seeing the world. Soon after, the Spanish arrived. Sickness swept through Tenochtitlan, smallpox. No one knew its name, but it burned through the city like fire through dry grass. Within weeks, the canals were clogged with corpses. Entire families vanished overnight. The priests said the gods were angry. The Spaniards said their god was cleansing the land. And while death consumed the city, the empire's heart began to crumble. When Cortes finally attacked, he found not an empire of warriors, but a city haunted by the dead. The siege lasted months. The causeways that once carried life into Tenochtitlan now carried smoke, blood, and screams. The great temples burned. The lake ran red. Moctezuma was killed, though. No one agrees on how. Some say the Spaniards murdered him. Others whisper that his own people stoned him to death, believing he had betrayed them. By E-U-R-E, Tenochtitlan was ash and ruin. But this is where the true mystery begins, because what vanished wasn't just the empire's power, it was its memory. The surviving Aztecs did not simply die or submit. Many fled into the jungles and mountains, taking with them their gods, their rituals, and their stories. Whole tribes disappeared without trace, leaving behind temples swallowed by vines and symbols carved into rock that no one has ever fully deciphered. Spanish chroniclers claimed to destroy their idols, yet new shrines kept appearing in hidden caves. The old religion, they said, was dead, but it refused to stay buried. Archaeologists today still uncover evidence of this resistance, a quiet defiance beneath centuries of dust. Beneath colonial churches, they find fragments of the old temples, stones engraved with serpent scales and solar glyphs. Some scholars believe the Aztecs never truly vanished, they transformed, merging their faith with the religion forced upon them. The Virgin Mary became Tonantzin, the mother goddess. The cross became the sun. The prayers changed, but the voices remained the same. And yet, there's something else. For centuries, rumors have spread through rural Mexico of a hidden city deep within the mountains, a place the Spanish never found. Some say it was built by Aztec priests who escaped the fall, carrying with them sacred texts and treasures of unimaginable power. In the 1800s, explorers swore they saw the ruins of a city with obsidian towers, half buried in mist. No one has ever proven it, but stories persist that the last true Aztecs live still, guarding the heart of their world until the sixth sun rises. But if the empire truly vanished, why do so many traces of its knowledge remain? How did its language, Nahuatl, survive into the present day, still spoken by over 1 million people? How do its symbols still appear in modern Mexico's flag, the eagle devouring a serpent, perched upon a cactus, a very vision that, according to legend, marked the founding of Tenochtitlan itself? Maybe the Aztecs didn't disappear. Maybe they adapted, learning that survival sometimes requires invisibility. Still, one detail continues to haunt historians. When the Spanish conquered Tenochtitlan, they recorded taking an enormous treasure, gold, emeralds, jade masks, ceremonial weapons, enough to fill ships. But those ships never arrived in Spain. According to accounts, the treasure vanished somewhere along the journey, hidden or perhaps stolen. Centuries later, locals still speak of the lost gold of the Aztecs, buried somewhere in the valleys or beneath the ruins of the old city. Expeditions have searched rivers, caves, even beneath modern Mexico City, chasing whispers. Nothing has ever been found. Some say it was hidden deliberately, not for greed, but for preservation. That Aztec priests concealed it so the sacred relics would never fall into foreign hands. Others believe it sank with the last defenders into Lake Texcoco, a sacrifice to ensure the gods would remember them. And yet, sometimes, fishermen on the remnants of that ancient lake tell stories of seeing strange lights beneath the water, at night glimmers of gold that vanish when approached. The locals call it the breath of Tenochtitlan, a heartbeat beneath the city that never truly died. So what really happened to the Aztec Empire? Was it destroyed, or did it simply slip into shadow, waiting for the world to forget so it could quietly continue? As the night deepens over Mexico City, the streets pulse with life above the bones of an ancient world. Beneath the subway tunnels lie walls that once held warriors, priests, and emperors. The people walk unknowingly atop the ruins of gods. But sometimes, when the rains fall and the streets flood, fragments of obsidian, pottery, or carved idols rise to the surface, reminders that history never truly disappears. It only waits. And somewhere beneath the modern city, perhaps still buried under centuries of stone and silence, the heart of the Aztec Empire beats on, waiting for the next sun to rise. Or perhaps it already has. Rain falls softly over Mexico City, seeping into the cracks between stone and steel. Beneath the rhythm of the traffic, beneath the hum of neon lights, an older sound stirs the pulse of something buried. Centuries of progress have built upward, layer upon layer. Yet each drop of rain that strikes the earth carries an echo of the empire that once ruled here. The Aztec Empire, whose heart was torn out by conquest, still seems to breathe beneath the ground. When archaeologists began digging near the Zócalo, the main square of modern Mexico City, they expected to find remnants of colonial walls. What they uncovered instead stopped them cold. Beneath the concrete foundations, the blade of a ceremonial knife gleamed in the dust. Nearby, the outline of a massive serpent carved into stone, still fierce after 500 years, emerged from darkness. And at its center, buried beneath layers of mud and rubble, lay something older than the conquest itself, a hidden passageway leading into the forgotten chambers of Templo Mayor, the Great Pyramid of the Aztecs. The discovery made headlines, but what the newspapers didn't say was stranger. Inside the sealed chamber, the team found offerings untouched since the fall of the Emperor, precious stones, obsidian mirrors, and strange skeletal remains arranged in ritual precision. But among them was something that didn't belong to that age, a shard of gold with markings that didn't match any known Aztec glyph. The carving depicted a serpent swallowing the sun as symbol of renewal. Yet beneath it, engraved in impossibly fine detail, were letters that appeared Latin, as if someone long after the conquest had returned to leave a message within the ruins. No record explained it. No translation made sense. But for the archaeologists who worked in that dim chamber, the air carried something heavier than mystery. It felt like trespass. That night, the lead archaeologist dreamed of water rising through the temple's corridors, swallowing torches one by one until only a faint golden light remained, pulsing beneath the surface. He awoke trembling, with the sound of drums echoing faintly in his ears. Stories of strange occurrences began to spread among the excavation crew. Tools went missing. Electronic devices failed. Some claimed they heard chanting deep below, where no one was supposed to be. Others swore they saw shadows move along the walls, figures of priests and warriors walking through the smoke of time. To outsiders, it was superstition. But to those who knew the old legends, it was something else. The Aztecs had believed that the fifth sun their age would end not with fire, but with water. A great flood that would cleanse the world, leaving behind only those chosen by the gods to rebuild. What if, some whispered, that flood wasn't water at all? What if it was time itself, erasing their world and leaving only fragments behind? Modern historians have long argued that the empire's fall was inevitable, that disease, betrayal, and superior weaponry made its collapse certain. But new evidence began to challenge that neat narrative. In 2018, beneath the site of an old convent, researchers unearthed a cache of codices hidden inside clay jars, preserved against centuries of decay. Unlike most Aztec manuscripts, these weren't destroyed by the Spanish. The writing's cryptic, painted with pigments from crushed insects and ash, spoke of a secret council held during the empire's final days. It described a meeting of priests, warriors, and scholars who refused to accept the prophecy's end. They believed that the fifth sun could be preserved not through war, but through concealment. They called their plan the Sleeping Heart. According to the fragments, this group fled the city before it fell, carrying sacred relics, rituals, and knowledge that would allow them to rebuild when the time was right. For centuries, this was dismissed as myth. Yet every excavation seemed to whisper the same pattern: hidden tunnels, sealed chambers, artifacts designed not to glorify the gods but to hide something vital. It wasn't the disappearance of an empire. It was its retreat. And then came the story of Dr. Isabella Torres. In 2022, she led a small team into the mountains of Puebla, following local legends of a cave said to breathe. Villagers warned her not to go that the cave belonged to the spirits of those who built the old world. But Isabella was relentless. Inside, the air was thick and metallic. The walls shimmered with mineral deposits that caught the light like wet obsidian. After hours of navigating the dark tunnels, her flashlight caught something impossible, a pattern carved into the rock that matched the glyphs of the Templo Mayor. The carvings told a story, one that twisted everything history had claimed. It spoke not of an ending, but of transformation. When the fifth sun falls, the inscription read, "The heart shall sleep beneath the world of strangers, and when it wakes, it will remember its name." Isabella's team found more ceremonial objects that seemed untouched by time. A jade mask still gleaming, feathers still bound with gold wire, a circular calendar carved with meticulous precision. And at the center of it all, a sealed stone chest. They opened it carefully. Inside lay a small object wrapped in woven fiber. When the cloth was unwrapped, it revealed a heart-shaped amulet of obsidian, polished to a mirror's darkness. When light struck it, faint lines glowed across its surface, lines that formed the ancient glyph for sun. That night, as the team camped near the site, the mountains trembled with a low rumble. Some said it was coincidence, tectonic movement, but those who stood closest to the cave entrance swore they heard drums beneath the earth. Isabella brought the amulet back to Mexico City, but soon after, she vanished. Her colleagues found her apartment empty, her research files wiped, her notebooks missing. The only clue was a voice message left on her assistant's phone, a whisper, barely audible beneath static. "They're not gone," she said. "They're waiting." Then the call ended. The disappearance became another story folded into Mexico's long, shadowed history. But the artifact she uncovered, the obsidian heart, resurfaced months later in an anonymous donation to a small museum in Oaxaca. No one knows who delivered it. Those who've seen it say that when you stand before it, your reflection bends. The room feels colder. Some visitors claim to hear faint sounds, flutes, distant chanting. Others dismiss it as imagination. Yet, when scientists tried to photograph it, every image came out blurred, as if the surface refused to be captured. Still, the more we learn, the deeper the mystery becomes. The Aztecs vanished from history, yet their calendar predicted not only their own fall, but cycles beyond our own. The fifth sun, they believed, would end and collapsed. Its death would give birth to the sixth. Could that rebirth already be happening, hidden beneath modern life, invisible to those who no longer believe? In the streets above the ruins, traditions continue the Day of the Dead, where families bring offerings to their ancestors, filling the night with candles, marigolds, and whispers. Too many, it's just culture, heritage. But some say the ritual is older than the saints and the Spanish names. That each candle lit on that night calls back a fragment of what once was, a pulse of the sleeping heart below. And every year, the candles grow more numerous. At dusk, when the city glows orange and violet, the skyline reflects in puddles that ripple with unseen patterns. Somewhere below, tunnels stretch from the buried temples toward forgotten catacombs, connecting what was with what remains. In those narrow corridors, the air still carries the scent of copal and dust. And sometimes, faintly, the echo of voices speaking in no... Perhaps the empire didn't vanish in the past. Perhaps it hides in the present, woven into the names of places, the rhythm of language, the silent architecture beneath every stone. Maybe the sixth sun isn't a prophecy of rebirth, but a return, the moment when the forgotten world begins to stir once more. And maybe that stirring has already begun. In recent years, Mexico City has been sinking. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the ground lowers each year as the lake beneath it disappears. Scientists call it subsidence, a result of draining water from the old basin. But among locals, another idea whispers through markets and alleyways that the city sinks not from thirst, but because something beneath it is waking, drawing the world down toward its pulse. They say that when the rains come and the streets flood, you can hear the old drums again, echoing from somewhere deep below. Not loud, not menacing, just steady like a heartbeat. The sound of time remembering itself. And as the rain falls tonight, the reflection of the modern skyline flickers in the water, shimmering with hints of another city beneath it, one made of temples, obsidian, and gods who refuse to die. Somewhere down there, in darkness that no archaeologist has yet reached, the sleeping heart of the Aztec Empire might still be waiting to rise once more. And when it does, when the sixth sun breaks through the soil and smoke, it won't announce itself with conquest or fire. It will begin quietly, as it always has. A tremor beneath the feet. A shadow in the rain. A memory too stubborn to fade. And perhaps that's the greatest secret of all that. The Aztec Empire never disappeared. It simply turned its face away, waiting for the right moment to return. The question is, when that moment comes, will we recognize it? Or will we mistake its awakening for the sound of the earth itself cracking open? The rain didn't stop that night. It became a steady downpour that blurred the edges of the city, washing away neon and noise until everything dissolved into a silver haze. Down beneath that restless storm, something stirred again. The old tunnels under Mexico City, once drainage systems, once canals, once sacred pathways, had begun to flood. But this wasn't just water. It carried silt, bone fragments, and pieces of ancient pottery that hadn't seen daylight in centuries. When municipal workers arrived the next morning to clear the blockage, one of them found a sealed stone tablet half buried in the mud. Its surface was slick with grime, but as the rain rinsed it clean, faint carvings emerged: a sun disk, flanked by jaguars, serpents, and something stranger. Beneath the glyphs, words had been etched in Spanish, but old Spanish, written in a trembling hand. They read, "He who breaks the sleep will never see the dawn." No one could explain it. The artifact was sent to the National Museum, where experts studied it in silence, tracing the grooves, feeling the chill that seemed to emanate from the stone itself. Within days, rumors began to spread again of sounds in the tunnels, of a faint rhythm pulsing through the earth like the beat of a heart. And then, almost as if answering those whispers, the city itself began to shift. Seismographs registered small tremors beneath the valley, too faint to cause damage, yet too regular to be natural. Every few nights, around the same hour, a low vibration rolled through the foundations of the old district. Windows trembled, water rippled in glasses, and people began to dream. They described the same thing: a city of light beneath the earth, towers of obsidian rising from water, drums echoing from beyond sight, faces painted in gold, eyes burning like coals, and a voice whispering in a language they didn't know, yet somehow understood. When they awoke, they carried the sound of that language still ringing in their heads. Now what? It wasn't just ordinary citizens. The dreams spread to those working the excavation sites. A linguist studying the newly unearthed codices woke one night to find strange symbols drawn across her notebook glyphs she didn't remember writing. They translated roughly to, "The sun remembers." By now, government officials were uneasy. Excavations were temporarily halted. Yet Dr. Isabella Torres's name, once forgotten, began resurfacing in connection to all of it. Whispers circulated that she hadn't disappeared at all, that she was still alive, hiding somewhere in the mountains, following a trail the rest of the world was not ready to see. But then, a file appeared online. An anonymous upload grainy footage taken from what appeared to be a body camera. The timestamp dated back to the week before Isabella's disappearance. The video opened with torchlight flickering against damp stone. Voices echoed softly, their Spanish strained with fear. "It's deeper than we thought," someone said. "The walls are moving." Then came the sound of running water. Slow at first, then rushing. The camera tilted downward, revealing a floor covered in carvings that glowed faintly alive under the light. The image blurred as the person stumbled forward. And in those few moments before the feed cut, a figure appeared in the distant stall, cloaked, its face hidden behind a jaguar mask of gold. The voice that followed was deep, guttural, and ancient. "Do not wake what sleeps." Then the screen went black. The clip was quickly removed, but not before it spread across the internet. People debated whether it was a hoax, a viral campaign, or evidence of something the government wanted buried. But those who watched closely noticed something strange. In the final frame, just before it cut to black, a reflection flickered across the camera. Lenses sane, obsidian, amulet Isabella had found, glowing faintly like a dying ember. And then the earthquakes began. They weren't violent, but they were persistent waves of motion rolling beneath the valley every few days, accompanied by a faint sound like distant drums. Scientists said the cause was natural settling, the slow collapse of ancient canals beneath the city. But others began to whisper that the sleeping heart was stirring. It wasn't long before something else surfaced. A construction crew, expanding the metro system near the old district, broke into an underground chamber lined with carvings. At first, it seemed like another archaeological site. But the carvings were wrong! They were too new. The paint still shone. And in the center of the chamber, on a raised stone slab, lay a figure perfectly preserved, wrapped in turquoise cloth. Its skin, dark and dry, seemed untouched by time. And in its chest, where the heart should have been, sat an obsidian amulet identical to the one Isabella discovered. The authorities sealed the site immediately, but not before one of the workers took a photo. The image spread across the city, igniting panic and awe. Historians claimed it couldn't be real. Others said it was the proof the world had been ignoring that the Aztecs had never vanished, that they had built sanctuaries beneath the earth, waiting for the prophecy to complete. Meanwhile, in a quiet corner of the museum, the first amulet began to change. Monitors recorded faint electromagnetic pulses emanating from it at irregular intervals, pulses that matched the rhythm of the earthquakes. The artifact was responding, as if something beneath the ground was calling to it. In the following weeks, strange phenomena became impossible to dismiss. A section of the Zocalo Plaza sank overnight by several inches, leaving a circular depression shaped eerily like the sun disk found on the stone tablet. Birds began gathering in great numbers over the area at dusk, circling silently before vanishing into the night. Locals claimed to hear a low chanting echoing through the streets after midnight. The government issued The scientists offered rational explanations. But those who had seen the dreams, the archaeologists, the linguists, the workers knew something was approaching. And then, for the first time, the drums were heard above ground. It happened during a thunderstorm! The sound rolled across the city like distant thunder, but the rhythm was too deliberate, measured, ceremonial. The same pattern that appeared in the old codices, the heartbeat of the fifth sun. Windows vibrated. Streetlights flickered. For nearly a full minute, everything stopped. And when it ended, power went out across the city. When light returned, something had changed. Near the excavation site, the rain had carved open part of the earth, exposing a vast network of tunnels that stretched further than any previous map. Inside, the walls were covered with murals that shouldn't have survived centuries. They depicted the fall of the Aztec Empire, but with one chilling difference. The murals didn't end in destruction. They ended with rebirth. A sleeping figure rising from the lake, the city blooming once again in light. The following morning, a local reporter captured footage that would later be banned from broadcasts. In the flooded streets, a faint circular ripple pattern had appeared, moving in perfect synchrony, as if something below the surface were breathing. And from one of the cracks in the pavement, dark water bubbled up, not muddy, but glistening black, reflecting light like obsidian. Days later, a second artifact surfaced, this time in a private collection. A small gold disc, etched with a calendar pattern that extended beyond the known Aztec cycle. It didn't end with the fifth sun. It continued into a sixth and even a seventh. The symbols beside them weren't ones scholars could translate, but one phrase stood out, repeated several times. When the world forgets, the world begins again. It was then that a realization began to take shape. The Aztecs may have foreseen their downfall not as tragedy, but as transformation. They may have known that their empire would vanish in one form, only to rise in another, hidden beneath the civilization that replaced it. Every tremor, every dream, every inexplicable pulse beneath the city was not the past. Returning it was the present, colliding with what had never left. But there was one more twist waiting, one that would challenge even that understanding. A team of seismologists monitoring the tremors noticed something impossible. The source of the vibrations wasn't random. It was moving. Each day, the epicenter shifted slightly, following a slow path across the valley, tracing the same pattern as the ancient causeways that once led to Tenochtitlan's heart. And then, one night, the vibrations stopped altogether. Silence spread across the city. For the first time in months, the earth was still. People slept uneasily. Sensing that the quiet wasn't peace, it was anticipation. At dawn, a thin mist rose from the ground, curling like breath. And beneath it, near the ruins of the old temple, workers found something glinting in the Muda mask of gold, shaped like a human face, eyes hollow but wide open. When lifted from the earth, the mask was warm to the touch. The archaeologist who held it felt a faint pulse through the metal, rhythmic and steady. For a moment, she thought it was her imagination until she realized the beat matched her own heartbeat exactly. And then it stopped. Somewhere deep beneath the city, a sound echoed slow, deliberate, like the turning of stone. The air seemed to tighten, as if the earth itself were holding its breath. And in that silence, One question began to form one that no scientist, priest, or historian could yet answer. What if the Aztec prophecy wasn't about destruction or rebirth at all, but return? And if that's true, then maybe the sixth sun isn't coming. Maybe it's already here. The sky had turned a deep steel gray by the time the realization settled, the kind of sky that feels heavy, swollen with unspoken tension. A silence blanketed the camp, one that wasn't born from peace but from fear of what might come next. The winds from the lake carried a strange chill, almost metallic, whispering through torn sails and scattered debris. It was as if nature itself was holding its breath, watching them, waiting. Perry stood near the shattered mast, his gaze fixed on the water. Beneath his calm exterior, something had shifted. His earlier certainty, that fierce confidence that had held his men together through chaos, now trembled under the weight of what he knew. The enemy had not retreated. They had regrouped, and soon they would return stronger, angrier, more prepared. The first victory had been a spark, but this storm, he sensed, would test every ounce of faith he had left. The wounded were being tended to, their groans mixing with the rhythm of the waves. Lanterns flickered against the darkness, throwing long, wavering shadows across faces that looked older than they were just hours ago. A young sailor named Briggs, barely 17, sat by the broken hull, his hands shaking as he cleaned his rifle. He looked up when Perry passed by, his eyes searching for reassurance. "Sir," he said quietly, "do you think they'll come again?" Perry didn't answer immediately. He looked out over the horizon, the faint line where the lake met the night. "They always come again," he finally said, his voice low. "The question is whether we'll be ready when they do." That night, sleep became a rare visitor. Every creak of the ship, every gust of wind felt like an omen. Somewhere in the darkness, beyond the mist, a faint echo rolled the distant boom of cannons being tested, ships being prepared. It was not yet war again, but the promise of it lingered like thunder before the rain. By dawn, the lake was still. The morning light cut through the mist like a blade, sharp and cold. Perry walked along the deck, his boots slick with dew. He paused near the edge, watching the reflection of the rising sun ripple across the water. There was beauty in it, fragile and deceptive, the kind of beauty that could only exist before everything shattered again. He closed his eyes for a moment, hearing his own breath over the hush of the lake. In that stillness, memories pressed in the faces of the men they had lost. The smell of gunpowder, the heat of fire tearing through wood. He could still see the look in their eyes, that fleeting mix of terror and faith before the smoke swallowed them whole. It was that memory, not the victory, that lingered. But the world doesn't wait for healing. By midday, the lookouts spotted movement in the north, faint shapes cutting through the fog, sails bearing the marks of the British fleet. The tension rippled through the men instantly. Orders were shouted, ropes pulled, cannons loaded. Perry climbed to the quarterdeck, his voice carrying through the chaos. "Hold steady! We've faced them before. We'll face them again." The words rolled over the water like a tide. Men moved faster, their fear buried beneath the sharp rhythm of command. The calm was breaking. As the enemy ships drew closer, the air itself seemed to change denser, heavier, charged with something primal. The world narrowed to the deck beneath their feet and the dark shapes ahead. When the first cannon fired, it split the silence like lightning. The battle erupted again, not as a storm this time, but as a slow, grinding fire. Each explosion tore through the lakes quiet like a heartbeat gone mad. Smoke and flame tangled in the air. The sound of metal and screams became one continuous roar. Perry moved through it all with the strange clarity that only chaos can bring. He gave orders, pulled ropes, steadied men who were too young to die and too scared to live. But even as the battle raged, something deeper was happening, something unseen. Perry could feel it. A shift in the rhythm of everything around him. The lake, the wind, even the sound of the cannons. They all felt heavier, darker. For the first time, it felt less like a battle between nations and more like a reckoning. Then came the moment that changed everything. A cannonball struck near the main deck, splintering wood and throwing men into the air. Perry was thrown backward, his head slamming against the mast. For a second, the world dissolved into silence. No sound, no color, just an endless white void. When he opened his eyes, the world was a blur. He could see shapes moving, fire reflecting off water, lips shouting his name. He tried to rise, but his body refused. A memory surfaced: his brother, years ago, standing beside him on a riverbank, saying, "The water remembers. Oliver, it carries everything, victory, defeat, even our ghosts." And now, as the sound rushed back, as the battle screamed around him, he understood what those words meant. The lake had seen it all, their triumphs, their losses, their desperation, and it was bearing witness once again. Hands pulled him up. Blood trickled down his temple. He could taste iron and smoke. The world swayed, but he found his footing. The enemy ship was closing in fast, its cannons aimed directly at them. Perry looked at his men, their faces blackened with soot, eyes blazing with fear and fire. He raised his sword. "We hold this line," he shouted. "No matter what." They roared in answer, a sound that defied exhaustion and fear. The final volley erupted, cannon after cannon, the lake trembling under the force. The enemy ship reeled, its mainmast shattering in a burst of splinters. For a brief moment, it seemed they might win again. Then came the explosion. A flash, white, blinding, absolute. The deck lifted beneath them. The world turned upside down. Water, fire, and sound collided into one brutal instant. When the smoke cleared, the ship was barely holding together. Men screamed. Others floated motionless in the water. Perry staggered forward, gripping what remained of the railing. His ship was dying, and so were the men who had trusted him to keep them alive. He looked out over the burning lake, a scene that felt both real and dreamlike. The enemy was in retreat, but at a cost so steep it no longer felt like victory. He could barely hear anything now, only a distant ringing, a low hum that pulsed through his bones. He sank to his knees, his sword clattering beside him. Around him, flames licked the broken timbers, and the once-proud ship groaned under its own weight. The water below shimmered with oil and blood, reflecting a sun that now looked more like fire than light. In that haze of smoke and ruin, he realized something he hadn't before, that the true battle wasn't against the enemy across the water, but the one within. The battle between pride and purpose, between what he fought for and what he was becoming in the process. As the last of the cannons fell silent, Perry lifted his head to the sky, his vision blurred. He whispered something, maybe a prayer, maybe an apology, but the wind swallowed the words before they could reach the heavens. And then, faintly, through the fading thunder of war, came a new sound. The creak of wood, the ripple of waves against an unfamiliar hull. Another ship was approaching. Not enemy colors this time. Something else. The men around him turned, faces pale, eyes wide. Perry forced himself to his feet, gripping the railing for balance. Through the rising mist, a flag emerged, tattered but still standing. His breath caught. It was the signal he'd been waiting for, lying for since, but as the ship drew closer, the unease didn't fade, because something about it felt wrong. Too quiet, too deliberate. The way it moved through the smoke was almost ghost-like. And when he finally saw the faces on deck, pale, still, expressionless, a cold wave of realization washed over him. The war wasn't over! It had only just begun. The lake was a mirror of ghosts. Smoke drifted low over its surface, curling like memory. And the still water reflected the ruin of ships and men, as though the world itself had cracked open to swallow them whole. Perry stood at the edge of the shattered deck, his body trembling, every muscle screaming against the weight of exhaustion and disbelief. The approaching ship silent, deliberate slid through the mist like a specter. Its sails, torn and burned, caught only fragments of light. And then, through the haze, the faces came into view again. They weren't the faces of enemies. They weren't even entirely real. There were pale imitations of the fallen his own men, his brothers in arms staring back at him from the deck of that ghostly vessel. For one impossible heartbeat, Perry believed he was seeing the dead returned. Their expressions were vacant, but hauntingly familiar. The young man Briggs stood among them, his gaze empty, his uniform tattered and drenched. Perry blinked hard, trying to force the vision away, but it stayed, more solid with every breath. The world around him seemed to tighten. The air grew colder. Every sound, the crackle of distant flames, the soft lapping of waves felt far away. The ship came to a stop beside his broken vessel, the hull creaking like an ancient door opening between worlds. Perry took a step forward, one hand gripping the railing to steady himself. "Who are you?" he shouted, his voice hoarse from smoke and shouting. "Answer me!" No reply. Only silence, thick and endless. The figures on the other deck didn't move. They simply stood there, watching him. Then, slowly, one figure stepped forward, a man, dressed like him. But younger, eyes burning with the same fire Perry once carried before the weight of command had dimmed it. The man raised a hand, palm out, as if in warning. Perry's breath caught. The figure's face was his own. The world seemed to tilt. For a moment, the air felt alive, charged with a terrible clarity. He wasn't looking at a ghost. He was looking at everything. He'd tried to bury his ambition, his guilt, his failures. The reflection of a man who had started this war with faith and glory and ended it drowning in regret. The phantom ship's deck flickered like a mirage. The other Perry spoke without moving his lips. His voice came from everywhere: the wind, the water, even the beating of Perry's heart. "Was it worth it?" it asked. Perry tried to speak, but no sound came out. The younger version of himself took another step forward, eyes glinting like steel. "You said it was for freedom," the voice continued, calm and cruel. "For country, for honor. But look at what's left. Do you see freedom here? Do you see honor in the ashes?" Perry's hands clenched. "You don't understand," he rasped. "I did what I had to do." The reflection tilted its head slightly. "No," it said softly. "You did what you wanted to do." For a long moment, the two men stared at each other, one made of flesh and blood, the other of memory and conscience. And then, like a ripple through reality, the illusion began to fracture. The phantom crew faded, dissolving into the mist. The ship began to sink silently beneath the surface, leaving only the faint outline of its sails in the water. Perry staggered forward, reaching out, but his hand touched only smoke. He fell to his knees. The sound of battle had long faded, but inside him, the war raged on. The lake stretched endlessly before him, vast and unfeeling. In its depths lay every life he had taken, every choice he had justified, every fragment of himself he'd lost along the way. He pressed a trembling hand to the deck. The wood was warm from the fires, slick with blood and seawater. Around him, the surviving crew moved like ghosts, silent, dazed, their faces hollowed out by what they had witnessed. The price of victory, he realized, was not written in medals or songs. It was etched into their eyes. The wind shifted. Somewhere behind him, the sound of oars echoed softly. Real ships, this time reinforcements, arriving too late to matter. Their flags fluttered faintly in the morning light. Perry didn't turn to look. He already knew what they would see. A battlefield disguised as a lake, a commander haunted by the silence that follows glory. He rose slowly, the movement heavy, deliberate. His sword lay beside him, its blade cracked, the edge dulled. He picked it up and stared at it for a long while. The reflection that stared back was older now, eyes dark, jaw tight, a man carved by duty and remorse in equal measure. The reinforcements reached them. Boots thudded against the planks, voices called out, asking for orders, for explanations, for reassurance. Perry gave none. Instead, he walked to the bow, where the air smelled cleaner, sharper. He looked across the lake once more. The sunlight was breaking through the smoke now, golden rays spilling across the water like a benediction on the damned. It was beautiful and unbearable. A soft voice broke through behind Himbrix, the young sailor who'd survived. His face was pale but alive, eyes wide with confusion and awe. "Sir," he said quietly, "we won, didn't we?" Perry turned to him slowly. The boy's voice trembled, but there was something fragile in its hope, or maybe desperation. Perry studied him for a long time before answering. "We survived," he said at last. "That's not the same thing." The boy looked away, as if ashamed for asking. Perry's gaze softened. He wanted to tell him more too, explain that survival carried its own burdens, that living meant carrying the ghosts of those who couldn't. But the words stayed locked inside. Instead, he placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Go below deck," he said quietly. "Help the wounded!" As the boy left, Perry turned back toward the horizon. The sun had risen fully now, burning away the mist. The world looked new, cleansed by fire and grief. Somewhere in that brightness lay the promise of peace. But for men like him, peace was not a gift. It was something earned one scar, one ghost, one memory at a time. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in days, the wind didn't feel like an enemy. It brushed against his face softly, like forgiveness. The sound of waves lapping against the hull grew rhythmic, steady like the heartbeat of the lake itself, ancient and eternal. He thought of his brother again, of the words he'd spoken long ago. The water remembers. Perry understood now. The lake would remember all of the courage, the blood, the dreams that had died beneath its waves. But maybe, in that remembering, there was redemption. The cries of gulls echoed in the distance. The surviving men began to lower what was left of the sails. The war was not over in the world beyond, but here, in this moment, something had ended and something else had begun. Perry raised his gaze to the sky. Clouds parted, revealing an expanse of impossible blue. He could almost hear the whisper of the men he'd lost, carried on the wind. Not words, not accusations, just presence. He nodded once, as though acknowledging them. And then he turned away from the water. Behind him, the lake shimmered, reflecting a sky too bright for grief. The wind carried the smell of smoke and salt and something faintly sweet perhaps, the scent of hope, fragile but persistent. Perry walked toward the crew, toward the work that still needed to be done. Each step felt like a reckoning, each breath like a promise. The war had taken everything, from him, his innocence, his peace, perhaps even his faith, but it had given him one thing back, the truth. That victory was never measured in what was gained, but in what one was willing to face. As the sun climbed higher, Perry looked back one last time. The water gleamed, calm and endless, hiding its secrets beneath a glassy surface. He whispered to it, "Barry oldie boodoo, remember us well." And with that, he turned fully toward the living. The lake rippled once, as if in answer, before returning to silence. The ghosts faded with the mist, leaving only light on the water fierce, brilliant, and unbroken. The lake had grown quiet again. The wreckage was gone, the smoke long dispersed by the gentle breath of wind sweeping in from the north. Only the ripples remained soft, circular, fading into one another until the water lay still, like a mirror that had chosen to forgive. Perry stood at the shore, his boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. Morning light spilled across the horizon, pale and golden, illuminating the faint mist that hovered just above the surface. It felt like the world had exhaled, relieved to finally rest. The war had moved on, as wars always do, leaving behind men who could never quite follow. He watched as a Huron glided low over the water, wings cutting through the silence with graceful precision. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about orders, or losses, or duty. He was simply watching, existing in a rare moment, untouched by memory. But the past was patient, waited quietly, and it would not be denied. He could still feel it in the air, in the soft murmurs of the wind. The lake held every secret, every cry swallowed by time. He knew that someday, maybe long after he was gone, someone would stand here again and look across these waters, feeling that same inexplicable pull, the same whisper that had haunted him since the guns went silent. "The water remembers," his brother had said. Perry now understood that it wasn't just a warning. It was a truth so profound it hurt to accept. The lake didn't hold grudges or grant forgiveness. It simply remembered. Every act of courage, every moment of weakness, every decision born of fear or faith that kept them all perfectly preserved beneath its calm surface. He bent down and let his fingers touch the water. It was cool, alive, unchanging. Beneath it, fragments of ships lay buried like the bones of an era, silent witnesses to the choices of men. Yet, even in their decay, There was something sacred about them, a reminder that every destruction carries within it the possibility of renewal. As he stood again, he saw movement in the distant villagers returning to the shoreline, families rebuilding what had been lost. Their laughter was faint, carried faintly by the wind, but it was there. Life returning, quietly and insistently. Perry felt an unfamiliar warmth in his chest, something fragile but growing. Perhaps this was what victory truly meant, to not the defeat of enemies, but the endurance of the living. He turned away from the lake and began walking toward the trees, where the morning light broke into shifting mosaics of gold and green. Each step felt lighter, though he carried the weight of memory with him still. He didn't wish to forget anymore. Forgetting was erasure. Remembering that was redemption. In the months that followed, the lake became a place of pilgrimage. Not of conquest, but of reflection. Fishermen would cast their lines where cannons once fired, and children would skip stones over the waters that had once run red. The world had a way of healing itself. Though it never erased the scars, it simply learned to live with them. Perry would often return, standing in the same spot, watching the sun descend in streaks of crimson and gold. Sometimes he spoke aloud, not to anyone, but to the silence that had become his truest companion. He'd tell it about the ships that came and went, about the changing seasons, about the faces that had faded from his memory but not from his heart. And always, when he finished, he would whisper softly to the water, as though it were an old friend. "Do you still remember?" The ripples would move, just barely, like an acknowledgement. Years passed. The war became story, then legend, then history. Names were carved in marble, and songs were written about victory and valor. But those songs never spoke of what came after the quiet, the guilt, the slow rebuilding of a soul that had forgotten how to feel peace. Perry aged, though his eyes remained sharp. He lived not as a hero, but as a man who understood the cost of that word too well. One autumn evening, long after most had stopped speaking of battle, he sat by the water once more. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke and rain. The lake shimmered beneath a setting sun, smooth as glass. Across the distance, he saw children chasing one another near the shore, their laughter rising like birds into the air. He smiled faintly. The sound was a balm he hadn't known he needed. He closed his eyes and let the years unfold within him, the fire, the thunder, the ghosts. He saw faces of the men who'd stood beside him, their voices echoing through memory. Not in anguish this time, but in something close to understanding. They had all been bound by the same truth, that the world doesn't remember men for their victories alone, but for the peace they leave behind. The wind picked up, gentle but firm, carrying the faint scent of pine and water. He listened to it closely, and in that wind, he thought he heard words not spoken, but felt, "You kept your promise." When he opened his eyes, the lake was perfectly still, as if holding its breath. The reflection of the sky shimmered on the surface deep blue, merging with the soft fire of the horizon. For a fleeting second, he thought he saw something in that reflection, a faint outline of ships, sails full, gliding silently toward the setting sun. But when he blinked, they were gone, leaving only light and water. He sat there for a long time, until the sky faded into violet and the stars began to appear, first one, then another, until the heavens were full. The lake mirrored them all, a map of endless possibility. It struck him then that maybe the lake didn't remember him specifically. Maybe it remembered everything. Maybe that was its gift, to hold a memory of humanity itself, not as judgment, but as witness. The night deepened. Somewhere far across the water, an owl called. Perry rose slowly, his bones stiff, but his spirit unburdened. He took one last look at the water, at the reflections that danced like living stars. "You were right, brother," he murmured, voice low. "The water remembers, but so do we." He turned and walked away from the shore, the sound of his footsteps fading into the forest. Behind him, the lake remained unchanged, silent, eternal, shimmering beneath the starlight. And though the world would go on to forget the details of that day, the smoke, the fire, the trembling hands reaching across the water, the essence of it, lived on in quiet ways. In the way sunlight scattered across waves, in the laughter of children who never knew the meaning of the word surrender. In the hearts of those who chose compassion over conquest. Time would move forward, as it always does. But sometimes, when the wind passed over the lake just right, it carried a faint echo whisper of oars, a breath of sails, a heartbeat beneath the surface. And those who heard it would pause, sensing something vast and ancient and true. Because memory is not bound to the past. It is the pulse of everything that endures, the silent thread that connects what was, what is, and what will be. The stars above flickered brighter, as if reflecting that truth back upon the water. For a moment, the entire lake seemed alive with light soft, trembling, infinite. Then the wind shifted again, and the world settled into quiet. In the end, there was no monument, no triumph, no final declaration. Only the calm expanse of water, holding everything, every loss, every victory, every fragile dream in perfect balance. And somewhere in that stillness, between the stars and their reflection, a single question lingered, one that no war, no victory, no empire could ever answer completely. When the world forgets our names, what remains of the choices we made? The lake did not answer. It didn't need to. Its silence was enough. And as dawn began to break once more over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and rose, the world felt for just an instant whole again.